It was raining cats and dogs, with slanted streams of water hitting the asphalt, flooding roads and sidewalks. September had fully taken hold, and the weather was far from pleasant. Emily, hopping over puddles, covered her head with a plastic bag and dashed into the cafe, the old dog following close behind. "Hello, Mr. George. It's not just rain out there, it's a full-blown flood." Emily shivered from the cold and dampness as she was soaked to the bone. "You just make sure not to catch a cold." The old man shook his head, looking at her. Water was dripping from Emily, but he was well prepared for the walk, wearing rubber boots and a waterproof coat with a hood. "I'll try," she smiled and quickly ran up the stairs to their apartment. Entering, she called out with a laugh, "Mark, I'm home." Can you believe it? As if on cue, the car broke down, and I had to take the bus. I didn't know the road from the stop to home was this awful. Why didn't you call a taxi? Mark stepped out of the kitchen. They'd have dropped you off right at the door, and you wouldn't have gotten soaked. Well, I bumped into an old friend. We hadn't seen each other in ages, and she was headed our way on the bus. So I decided to keep her company, Emily explained. She just came back from the coast, she added. Must be nice. I could really use a trip to the beach in the velvet season right now, instead of this. Emily sighed as she took off her wet clothes. Mark gave her a thoughtful look, mulling something over in his head. I'll make you some hot tea right now. Don't get sick, okay, he muttered as Emily sneezed, concern evident in his voice. Mark had married against his mother's wishes. Their relationship had always been complicated. Angela, his mother, had raised him on her own, and with dread, had awaited the day he would get married and leave her. She considered her son her property and was highly jealous of any attachment he might have, until he had had enough of her constant supervision and control over where he was and who he was with. At 27, he met Emily, proposed to her within a few months, and informed his mother of his decision. Mom, congratulate me. I'm getting married. Angela nearly had a heart attack. Son, are you out of your mind? I haven't even met her. Who is she? What does she do? Where does she work? Who are her parents? She bombarded him with questions. Mom, it doesn't matter who she is. I'm marrying her, and that's all you need to know, Mark replied sharply. Then you won't be living here in my house, Angela declared. We weren't planning on it, he said. I'm moving in with her. With that, Mark dashed any last hopes his mother had of sabotaging their life together. To say that Mark was madly in love with Emily would be an overstatement. He liked her, but that was all. Marrying her was more about breaking free from his mother's suffocating control. Emily, for her part, was a simple girl who thought her boyfriend had truly fallen for her. She wasn't particularly remarkable, working as a secretary for a small-town official, a job she got through her father's connections. Sweetheart, it's a responsible job. Don't let me down, her father had said. And Emily, true to her nature, handled all tasks perfectly. Her boss was pleased with her performance. Emily had earned her driver's license, saved up for a used Ford over 3 years, and had a small apartment, given to her when her parents decided she was ready to live independently. Despite her simplicity, Emily turned out to be quite a catch, at least from the perspective of her future husband. They had been living together for 2 years now. Occasionally, Angela would drop by, but usually when Emily wasn't home. If they happened to cross paths, Angela would quickly make her exit. Why doesn't your mom like me? Emily would ask Mark after a visit from his mother. She doesn't like anyone, so don't take it personally, Mark would shrug. To be honest, he didn't really care what his mother thought of Emily, as long as there were no conflicts. By the time Emily was 25, she began thinking about having a child. Mark, let's try for a baby, she said one day, breaking out of her thoughts. We'll have a little one running around here, making tiny footstep sounds. But Mark had no plans for children. Recently, he had met a woman with model-like looks, and all his thoughts were consumed by her. You're crazy, Em. A baby in this tiny apartment? We can't handle that. I'm still figuring out life myself. I'm barely out from under my mom's thumb. I don't have the experience or the brains or the skills. Mark tried to wriggle out of the conversation. Mark, come on, everyone has doubts. But people have babies and figure it out. It'll be fine, Emily laughed, thinking these were just typical fears of a new father. I'll think about it, Mark muttered, trying to figure out how to delay this unpleasant topic as long as possible. Besides, he had a date planned for the next day, and that was all he could think about. The next day, after work, Mark, carrying a bouquet of flowers for his date, noticed a sign above the entrance of a building he hadn't seen before. He didn't frequent this part of town, so he hadn't noticed a travel agency there. Maybe this is fate, he thought as he climbed the steps and entered the office. The girl working there clearly knew her job, and half an hour later, Mark left with a travel voucher for a seaside trip, for Emily. She had to leave that very evening, and Mark could barely contain his excitement at the thought of 2 weeks of freedom. He was nearly jumping with joy, already imagining long, passionate nights with his new fling. "Son, what are you doing here?" His mother's voice nearly knocked the wind out of him. Mark froze, clutching the travel voucher and Emily's passport in his hands. Of all people, Angela was the last person he wanted to see at that moment. "What's that?" Angela asked, taking the voucher from his hand before he could stop her. "How interesting. Sending your wife on a trip alone, are you? And not going with her? What's the occasion for the flowers? You know, you don't live in another country, and the travel agency happens to be right in your building," Angela added, her mind quickly piecing everything together. Being a shrewd woman, she came to the obvious conclusion. "You're trying to send her away so she doesn't interfere with your little affairs, huh? The flowers must be for your lover," she deduced, with the satisfaction of someone catching a criminal red-handed. "This is none of your business." Mark snapped, trying to snatch the voucher back, but Angela tucked it into her purse, along with Emily's passport. "I'll give it to her myself. I'll tell her I bought it for her as a gift," she smirked. "You go on and enjoy your fun." Realizing he was caught, Mark spat in frustration and stomped away. Angela watched him leave, then went back into the travel agency. She booked a ticket for herself, laughing to herself as she left the office. He thinks he can buy his women flowers and vacations. Well, he won't get the satisfaction this time. "She's not going anywhere, and I'll make sure of it," Angela muttered as she headed for the train station, glancing at the map to see where this obscure place even was. "Perfect, let her have a nice long trip. Who knows, maybe I'll find a way to get rid of that little vixen too," she thought smugly as she picked up the train ticket. Emily was not expecting to see Angela at her door later that day. "Hello, Emily dear," Angela greeted as she stepped into the apartment. "Is Mark home?" "No, he's not back yet," Emily replied, confused by the unexpected visit. "That's fine. I actually came to see you. You see, there's this situation," Angela began, a little too casually. "My friends invited me to visit them, and they've planned a whole cultural program. I already bought a ticket, but something came up at work, and now I can't go. So, I thought, why don't you go in my place? You could use a break, right? A little relaxation." I'm not really stressed or anything," Emily shrugged. "Well, then, just go. Don't worry about the ticket, I already bought it. Think of it as a gift." "You deserve it," Angela insisted, her manipulative skills on full display. "But I'm not on vacation for another month," Emily said, though she was already beginning to waver. "Oh, come on, just talk to your boss. I'm sure they'll understand." "The ticket is for tonight," Angela dropped the bombshell. "Tonight?" Emily exclaimed, shocked. "Yes, tonight. So call your boss, and let's get going," Angela pressed on. "What about Mark?" Emily's head was spinning from the sudden pressure. "Mark will be fine. Let him miss you a little," Angela smirked. A quick phone call to her boss got Emily the time off she needed, though her boss was surprised by the short notice. She tried calling Mark, but his phone was out of service. Before she knew it, Angela had hurried her off, and Emily was on her way to an unknown destination. On the train, as the hours passed, Emily couldn't stop thinking about how quickly everything had happened. How did I let her talk me into this, she wondered. It feels like some kind of hypnosis. She hadn't wanted to go to the seaside, and now she was headed to who knows where. What am I going to do in the middle of nowhere? Emily thought to herself, feeling a growing sense of unease. As she looked at the map online, trying to figure out where she was headed, a conductor approached her. "Your stop is coming up soon, miss. Will someone be meeting you there?" the conductor asked. "Yes, I think so. My mother-in-law's friends are supposed to meet me. But I've never actually met them," Emily said, feeling more uncertain by the minute. The conductor's expression became a bit concerned. "Well, the station is very small. Hardly anyone gets off or on there. It's just surrounded by forest. You sure everything's all right?" "I'll manage," Emily forced a smile. When the train finally stopped, it felt like it was in the middle of nowhere. Emily stepped off, retrieved her backpack from the conductor, and looked around. There was no one there. The small shack that served as the station was empty. There was no one there to meet Emily. The small shack that served as the station was eerily empty, and the sound of the train fading into the distance only heightened her sense of isolation. It was getting darker, and the rain had returned, drumming on the roof of the shack. "Well, this is just perfect," Emily muttered to herself, slinging her backpack over her shoulder. "Maybe I should have stayed on the train. But it was too late for that now." She decided to look for any sign of life. "There's a road, at least," she thought, trying to stay optimistic. "People must use it to get here." The muddy, rain-soaked path led straight into the forest. As Emily walked deeper into the woods, her mood worsened. "What was I thinking, listening to her?" This is insane, she scolded herself, growing angrier with every step. I should have stayed home. Now I'm stuck in the middle of nowhere, and for what? She couldn't help but feel that Angela had done this on purpose. The road was getting slipperier, and the rain showed no signs of letting up. Soon, the light was fading fast, and the forest around her became dense and foreboding. Every rustle made her flinch. What if a bear comes out of nowhere, she thought, her nerves on edge. Or a wolf. The further she walked, the more lost she felt. She began to question if she had even stayed on the right path. The flashlight on her phone was doing little to light the way in the heavy rain and mud. Then, as if things couldn't get worse, she stepped into a patch of deep mud. First, it was up to her ankles, then her knees. Oh no, no, she cried as she realized she was sinking deeper. Panic set in. She struggled to pull one leg out, but the other sank even deeper. It's a swamp? Emily's heart raced as she realized what was happening. She was stuck, and the more she moved, the faster she sank. Help! Someone help me, she screamed, tears streaming down her face, mixing with the rain. The cold mud was now up to her waist, and she was losing strength. Her phone slipped from her hand and disappeared into the muck. Desperation took over as Emily realized no one knew where she was. Her mind flashed to her parents, to Mark, to how this could all be the end. This is it, she thought, her body growing numb from the cold and exhaustion. I'm going to die here, and no one will even know. Just as she was about to give up, something grabbed her from behind. She felt a strong grip pull her out of the mud, and she was lifted onto solid ground. Emily blacked out. When she regained consciousness, she was lying on a wooden bed in a small, warm cabin. She could hear the crackling of a fire nearby, and a faint light flickered across the walls. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then, the memories came flooding back, the swamp, the cold, the rain. She sat up suddenly, panic gripping her again. Whoa, easy there, a voice said from the corner of the room. A man stepped into the light. He was tall, with broad shoulders, wearing a rugged jacket and heavy boots. His face was weathered, with dark stubble and a serious expression, but his eyes were kind. You're safe now, he said. I pulled you out of the swamp just in time. Emily blinked, trying to make sense of what had happened. Who are you? She asked, her voice trembling. Name's Daniel, he said, handing her a cup of steaming tea. I'm a ranger around these parts. You're lucky I found you. Another few minutes, and that swamp would have swallowed you whole? Emily shivered, not from the cold, but from the memory of how close she had come to drowning in the mud. I don't know how to thank you, she whispered, taking the cup with shaking hands. Daniel shrugged. Don't mention it. But what were you doing out there, alone, in this weather? Not exactly the best time to go hiking. Emily sighed and began to explain. She told him everything, about Angela, the unexpected trip, how she had ended up at the station, and how no one had come to meet her. Daniel listened quietly, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he shook his head. Sounds like a hell of a mess, he said. But you're safe now. You should rest. You've had a rough night? Emily nodded, feeling the exhaustion wash over her. Thank you, again, she murmured, lying back down. Her body felt heavy, and before she knew it, she drifted off to sleep. When Emily woke up the next morning, the rain had stopped, and sunlight was streaming through the small window of the cabin. She felt warm and dry, wrapped in a thick blanket. She glanced around the room and saw Daniel sitting by the fire, reading a book. His dog, a large German shepherd, lay at his feet. Good morning, Daniel said, looking up from his book as he noticed her stirring. Morning, Emily replied, sitting up slowly. She felt sore but much better than the night before. How are you feeling? Daniel asked, getting up and walking over to her. Better, thanks to you, she said with a small smile. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't found me. Let's not think about that, Daniel said with a smile of his own. You're safe now, and that's all that matters. The dog, which Daniel had called Rex, jumped up and trotted over to Emily, licking her hand. She laughed softly and petted him. Looks like Rex likes you, Daniel chuckled. Emily smiled. He's sweet. After a moment of silence, Emily asked, Is there any way I can contact my family? They must be worried sick about me. Daniel nodded. We don't have much in the way of cell service out here, but I've got a satellite phone. You can use it to call them from the village. We'll head there later today. Thank you, Emily said, relieved. Daniel helped her into some of his dry clothes, and they set off together toward the village on his ATV. As they drove through the woods, Emily couldn't help but feel a strange sense of peace. The forest, now bathed in sunlight, looked entirely different from the night before. It was beautiful, lush and green, with birds singing in the trees and the smell of damp earth all around them. When they reached the village, Emily used Daniel's satellite phone to call her parents. The connection was weak, but she managed to reassure them that she was safe. Emily's voice crackled through the satellite phone as she reassured her parents that she was fine, safe, and with help. Her mother cried with relief, and her father's voice boomed over the poor connection, saying he'd come to get her right away. Emily, however, insisted she would return on her own soon. "It's okay, Dad. I'm safe, and I'll be home in a few days. Don't worry." After hanging up, she felt a wave of relief. Finally, she could breathe a little easier knowing her family wasn't panicking. Daniel watched her, leaning casually against the door of the small village medical outpost where they had stopped. "Feel better?" he asked. "Yeah, much better," Emily sighed, rubbing her forehead. "They were ready to come out here to rescue me, but I convinced them to wait." Daniel smiled. "Good call. Not many people know their way around these woods." They spent a little more time in the village, with the locals eyeing Emily curiously as she and Daniel walked through the main street. It was a small, tight-knit community, and Emily stood out with her city clothes and unmistakable air of being out of place. But she didn't mind. For the first time in days, she felt like she could think straight. The sun was shining, the air was fresh, and the nightmare of the swamp was starting to fade. As they prepared to head back to Daniel's cabin, Emily found herself glancing at him more often. There was something about his calm presence and the way he seemed so in tune with the forest that intrigued her. He was different from the people she was used to, quiet, self-assured, and deeply connected to nature. When they returned to the cabin, Daniel prepared a simple meal, and they sat together by the fire. The warmth of the flames and the coziness of the small cabin made Emily feel more at home than she had in a long time. "So," Daniel began, breaking the comfortable silence, "what are you going to do now?" Emily stared into the fire, thinking about everything that had happened. "Honestly, I don't know. I wasn't planning on this trip in the first place, and now, everything's changed." She sighed. "I'm not even sure if I want to go back." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Emily hesitated. "I mean, my life back home, it's complicated. My marriage, my work, it all feels so messy. I came out here because my mother-in-law basically forced me into it. And I've been thinking, maybe that's a sign. Maybe it's time for a change." Daniel didn't say anything for a moment. Then he nodded slowly. "Sometimes getting away from everything helps you see things more clearly. The forest has a way of making you face the truth, whether you like it or not." Emily glanced at him, feeling a strange connection to his words. "Yeah, I guess it does." The next few days passed in a quiet, peaceful rhythm. Emily spent her time resting and recovering, but she also explored the forest with Daniel, learning about the plants and wildlife. She found herself mesmerized by the beauty of the wilderness, the towering trees, the vibrant colors of the autumn leaves, the crisp, clean air. It was a world so different from her life in the city, and she found herself drawn to it more and more. One afternoon, while they were out walking, Emily turned to Daniel with a thoughtful expression. "Why did you choose to live out here? Away from everyone?" Daniel paused, looking out at the forest before answering. "I guess I've always felt more at home in nature. City life was never for me. My dad wanted me to take over the family business, but I couldn't do it. I needed something different. The forest gives me peace, you know? Out here, it's just you and the world around you. No noise, no pressure. Just life as it is." Emily nodded. She understood that feeling more than she realized. "I get that," she said softly. "Sometimes it feels like the world back there is too much. Too loud. Too fast." Daniel looked at her thoughtfully. "You don't have to go back if you don't want to, you know." Emily smiled sadly. "I wish it were that simple. But there's a lot waiting for me back home. I can't just walk away from it all. Maybe not. But you can choose how you face it. You've seen another way of life now." "That's something," Daniel replied, his voice calm and steady. The days passed too quickly, and soon enough, it was time for Emily to leave. On the morning of her departure, Daniel drove her to the small station where she would catch the train back to the city. The atmosphere was bittersweet. Neither of them spoke much during the ride, but the silence between them felt comfortable. When they arrived at the station, Daniel helped her with her backpack, and they stood together for a moment, neither wanting to say goodbye. "Thanks for everything," Emily said, her voice a little shaky. "I don't know what I would have done without you." "Take care of yourself," Daniel replied, his expression serious but kind. "And remember, you're always welcome here. The forest isn't going anywhere." Emily nodded, blinking back the sudden sting of tears. She didn't trust herself to speak, so she leaned in and hugged him tightly. Daniel hesitated for a moment, then returned the hug, his arms warm and strong around her. As the train pulled into the station, Emily turned and boarded. She glanced back one last time to see Daniel standing there, watching her go. The train started to move, and as it pulled away, Emily's heart felt heavier than she expected. When Emily finally arrived back in the city, she felt like she had returned to a different world. The noise, the crowds, the frantic pace of life, it all felt alien to her now. She stepped off the train, her backpack slung over her shoulder, and took a deep breath. The city felt suffocating after the peace of the forest. When she reached her apartment, the door was unlocked. As she stepped inside, the first thing she noticed was the sound of laughter coming from the bedroom. Her heart sank. She knew that voice. Mark's voice echoed from the bedroom, and when she opened the door, there he was, in bed with the woman he had been seeing behind her back. He froze when he saw her, his face pale with shock. "Emily, you're back early," he stammered. Emily stared at him for a long moment, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over her. She didn't even feel angry. It was as if all the hurt, all the frustration, had been washed away in the forest. "Yeah, I guess I am," she said quietly. "I hope you enjoyed your time." Mark scrambled to explain, but Emily wasn't listening. She turned and walked back into the living room, picking up her phone and dialing her parents. Her voice was steady as she spoke. "Dad? I'm coming home." Mark followed her out of the bedroom, panic in his eyes. "Emily, wait. We can talk about this." She turned to face him, her expression calm but resolute. "There's nothing to talk about, Mark. Pack your things and leave. This is my apartment, and I want you out by tomorrow." Mark stood there, dumbfounded, as Emily walked past him and out the door. Months passed. Emily filed for divorce, moved back in with her parents for a while, and started over. The city, the job, the life she had once known, it all felt distant, like a chapter she had closed for good. She took some time to figure out what she wanted, and more importantly, who she was without the noise of her old life clouding her judgment. One day, as she was packing up the last of her things to leave for a new job in a different town, her phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. "Hey. If you ever find yourself near the woods again, you know where to find me." Emily smiled softly, reading the message twice before putting the phone back in her pocket. She glanced out the window at the busy city streets below. The forest was calling her back, and this time, she knew she'd return. Thank you for listening to the story to the end. Write your thoughts about it in the comments. Subscribe to the channel Tell Me and share this video with your friends and loved ones. This motivates us to continue working on new stories every day. Do not miss the next amazing story that is about to appear on your screen. We are very grateful to you for being with us. In the description under this video you can open the catalog of all the stories. See you there.